Hey, Colorado Springs. This is Jenny Bayless. And I just wanted to give a short podcast episode on questions to ask when interviewing a property manager. We often tell our clients, to interview several property managers within a market that they're exploring, but we realize that we don't actually have any guidance of what types of questions to ask. So I think that this is just to kind of give people some ideas, especially for first time investors, of what type of questions to ask their potential future property managers when they're interviewing them. So, of course, this list is not comprehensive, but these are the types of questions that I would recommend asking just so you can have a general idea of how property managers compare. But I always encourage people to ask as many questions as they need to feel comfortable, but figure this is a good starting point. So the first one, and kind of, the most obvious one, is what are your costs? Most property managers do a percentage of rent. Sometimes they do a flat rate. I think that it's important to figure out what it is exactly that they operate on for that. And then for percentage of repairs, sometimes property managers do an add-on or a markup on repair costs. Always important to understand that if there's any lease placement or renewal costs that the landlord or tenant has to bear. Is there anything else that isn't clearly defined? I think that it's important to just ask them for a total list of possible expenses to you. Vacancy rate. This is also a very important question to ask. What is the property manager's portfolio vacancy rate? They should have a report that will give you this information. Obviously, the lower it is, the better. That means that they are avoiding vacancy either through being great property managers and the tenants enjoy living there, or if the tenants do leave, which they will, being able to place a qualified tenant in there quickly, getting, turnover of the unit and so on and so forth. Also, another important question is what is the average tenant stay and what is the average turnover cost? So if you have an average tenant stay of a year, you're going to be turning over that unit every single year, which is very, very expensive. I am definitely of the camp that it is much easier and much cheaper to keep a good tenant in your unit so that you don't have to turn it over as opposed to raising the rent on them. I would much rather be below market rate and not have to turn that unit over because it's just a lot of brain power, a lot of costs to turn it over. If you already know that your tenant is great, like why rock the boat? So I think that's a very important question to ask them. Another question is, how long have you been in operation? Personally, I think that a property manager should have, a good one has been in operation for many years. There's constantly changing and evolving tenant landlord laws. Just kind of seeing a gamut of different situations, repair situations, even just, being able to troubleshoot with tenants. I think that it's important to be able to diagnose the issue correctly the first time if there's a repair issue. And then again, just kind of having that backstop of knowledge about how to properly operate as a property manager. Kind of along the same lines is what are the methods that you advertise? I do not want a property manager that simply sticks a sign in the yard and doesn't advertise on Zillow, for instance. Like Zillow is where I primarily get all of my tenants that apply to my properties. I think that it's very important that they stay up to date on how tenants research their properties. So I would definitely inquire how they do that. Another question is, do you specialize in a certain area of town or a certain type of property? Because as we know, certain parts of town and certain types of properties are managed very differently. Multifamily versus single family is a very different type of management style. And I actually see it as a plus if, say, you're interviewing property managers and they say, yeah, sorry, we don't work with multifamily. We only work with single family, for example. I see that as a great, a point of reference that, hey, if you have a single family property that you need managed, maybe they would be good for you for that because they know what their strengths are and they know what, their area of focus is. So just kind of keep that in mind. How many properties do you manage and do you have capacity limits? I do not want my property manager to take on more properties than they can effectively manage. That does happen. Sometimes property management companies merge or they get bought out or, just different types of structure, restructuring happening. That could really throw a wrench in the operations. I think that it's very important to, know what your limits are in order to be able to provide good customer service to the owners and the tenants. And then also, how do you determine your preferred vendors? This is this is very important. You don't want them sending a vendor that is just extremely expensive every single time you have a small leak in the sink or something like that. You don't you're probably going to be spending a little bit extra than if you had sourced it yourself for that kind of convenience fee, but overall you need it to be in line with market rate, in my opinion. And then also quality of the vendors. You don't want someone continuously having to come over and fix the same thing over and over again, to which you have really no control over the situation. So definitely, ask how they do that. If they have multiple of, certain types of vendors as well, like certain trades, like how many HVAC, how many plumber, how many electric, that sort of thing. And just in case you don't, prefer one, if you can opt for a different one. Another question. What is your property management contract length? Does the PM keep lease break and late fee revenues? So kind of random there, but you should definitely ask if the property manager keeps the lease break and the late fee revenue, because that's really, I see that as an expense to the owner, because if someone breaks their lease, you're going to have unexpected vacancy, you're going to have unexpected turnover costs. That's kind of frustrating to the owner. Some property managers keep that fee. So definitely ask that question. Same with late fee. We always encourage people to have 6 months reserve at least in their bank account for, mortgage payments and whatnot. But, late fees as well, that if for some reason you incurred a late fee on your mortgage being, late to receive your rent, which I don't encourage you being in that situation, but, kind of like a headache fee for you on that. And then PM contract length. Is it 1 year, 2 years, 3 years? Personally, I kind of think the shorter, the better. That way you can test them out and not be locked in for an extended amount of time if it's just not working. So just definitely keep an eye on that as well. Do you require that renters maintain renters insurance as part of your lease? Some property managers do not require this, which is not a great idea because, I'm not going to get into the details of renters insurance, but unfortunately, quite a few of our renters have had to, tap into their renters insurance over the past couple of years. If there's a flood and you have to have them temporarily move out so you can make the repairs. That's what their renter's insurance covers. It covers their temporary lodging or if any of their personal items got damaged during that, because a landlord's insurance does not cover that. So it just really protects the tenant as well. I think that it's very important to require that as part of your lease. And then another question, how do you screen your tenants? Do you have a really, really thorough process? It could be one of each way. If it's too strict, you're probably going to run into vacancy issues. I'm not looking for a perfect tenant there, like that. That's kind of unrealistic. But then also if it's too lax, you run the risk of having a tenant that, isn't going to pay or might not take care of your property or something. So you really need to ask them what their requirements are for screening and how they properly screen the tenants to find that right mix. And then lastly, what is the average response time for tenants and owners? Tenants, they want to be heard. This is their home. So they expect a quick response time, which I am very much a proponent of. Like, for even our self-managed properties, if a tenant reaches out to me and it's not an emergency situation, I immediately respond acknowledging receipt of the issue with an expected timeline. I think that tenants deserve that sort of respect as to what's going on with their home. And most tenants are very reasonable. They know what an emergency is, and they know what an emergency is, or not an emergency is. So just having that open line of communication is very important. So I would expect the same thing of a property manager, to acknowledge and provide the tenant with some sort of guideline. Same thing on the owner side of thing. What is the response time for owners? If owners have a question on their management report, like what's going on here? Where's this? What's happening here? I would expect the property manager to respond within a day, because this is a very expensive asset that you have, and you're entrusting a third party to manage it. So you kind of it's kind of high on the priority list of information you want to have at your disposal. So again, this was just a very basic list of questions that I think would be important to start the conversation. And from there, if some property managers meet your requirements, some don't, you can kind of narrow it down from there and expand on questions that you personally find interesting. So thanks everyone for listening, and I hope that this comes in handy as you begin interviewing property managers. Thanks everyone.